Imagine leaving a child alone in a mansion with a wallet full of cash and a diamond-studded watch right in front of them. Would they resist? This billionaire didn't think so, and when he pretended to sleep, he froze at what happened next. Richard Harlow was a man who lived in a fortress of wealth. His mansion overlooked the city like a castle, guarded by tall gates and cameras that watched every corner. Inside, every wall gleamed with polished marble, and every room carried the weight of his fortune. He was the kind of man whose name commanded respect in boardrooms, but behind closed doors, he carried a heavy distrust of people. Years of betrayal had hardened him, partners had stolen from him, friends had turned against him, and even family had tried to use him for his money. Over time, Richard began to believe that everyone, no matter how kind they appeared, had a price. And once that price was revealed, honesty disappeared. Among the many staff who worked in his mansion, Grace stood out. She was his maid, quiet, hard-working, and unfailingly respectful. Richard never had reason to question her loyalty, but what drew his attention more than Grace was her young daughter, Amara. Grace, a single mother, sometimes brought Amara to the mansion when she couldn't find someone to watch her. Amara was small, no older than 7, with curious eyes and a soft voice. Unlike most children, she never ran wild or caused chaos. She would sit quietly in the corner with a worn-out book or follow her mother carefully, always respectful of the mansion's rules. Still, Richard's heart was skeptical. Innocence, he thought, could easily be broken by temptation. Children were curious, and curiosity often led to mistakes. He began to wonder, was Amara truly disciplined, or was her good behavior only because her mother was watching? That evening, as the golden chandeliers bathed the grand living room in warm light, Richard decided to test the truth. He reclined on his velvet couch, pretending to grow tired after a long day of work. With deliberate care, he placed his expensive diamond watch and his thick leather wallet on the coffee table beside him. Both gleamed under the light, impossible not to notice. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and slowed his breathing until he looked convincingly asleep. His plan was simple: observe what Amara would do when left alone with riches right before her eyes. Would she touch them? Would she slip the wallet into her pocket? Or would she resist temptation? From the kitchen, Grace's voice drifted faintly as she prepared tea, leaving Amara in the living room with him. Richard's sharp instincts switched on, even in his feigned slumber. Every second stretched longer, every sound magnified. Now he thought, the truth will finally come out. The mansion's silence deepened as Grace's faint clinking of cups and spoons came from the kitchen. Left alone in the vast living room, Amara swung her legs gently as she sat on the small stool near the coffee table. Her eyes, full of quiet wonder, scanned the room, then landed on the glittering objects lying within reach: Richard's sleek wallet and his diamond-studded watch. The wallet bulged with crisp bills peeking out slightly as if whispering an invitation. The watch shimmered under the chandelier, reflecting fragments of light across the marble floor. For a child, such things could easily capture attention. And indeed, Amara leaned forward, her gaze fixed on them. Richard, though lying still, sharpened his attention. Behind his closed eyelids, he watched through the faintest slit. His heart ticked faster than the gold clock on the wall. This is it, he thought. She'll touch it. She won't resist. Amara rose from the stool, each step of her small feet echoing softly on the polished floor. She reached the table, and Richard's chest tightened. Her tiny hand hovered near the wallet. For a brief second, he was certain his doubts were right. But then, Amara's hand shifted, not toward the wallet, but toward the blanket draped unevenly across Richard's shoulder. With careful movements, she lifted the blanket and pulled it up to cover his chest. "Mommy says no one should feel cold when they rest," she whispered softly, almost as though tucking in a loved one. Richard's heart jolted. He hadn't expected this. Still, he didn't move. He needed more proof. Amara turned to leave, but her gaze caught the wallet that had slid a little too close to the edge of the table. Slowly, she bent down and picked it up. Richard's pulse quickened. This was the moment, the true test. But instead of opening it, she gently pressed the notes back inside, closed it, and placed it neatly back on the table, aligning it exactly where it had been. She even straightened the watch beside it, murmuring to herself, "Things should always be where they belong." Then, as if nothing unusual had happened, she returned to her stool and pulled out the tiny cloth she always carried. With small, deliberate motions, she began wiping the corner of the coffee table, humming a soft tune to herself. Richard's hidden eyes flickered with disbelief. Every action she took contradicted everything he had believed about human nature. No greed, no carelessness, just honesty and care, flowing naturally as if it was the only way she knew how to live. For the first time in years, Richard Harlow, the billionaire who trusted no one, felt uncertain. Was this innocence? Or had he just glimpsed a kind of honesty that could not be bought? Richard remained perfectly still, his breathing measured, but inside his chest, a storm was brewing. The weight of what he had just witnessed pressed heavily against the walls of his mind. A child, left alone with money and treasure glistening right before her eyes, had resisted temptation. Not only that, she had shown kindness instead, covering him with a blanket as if he were fragile, as if he mattered. It unsettled him. For decades, Richard Harlow had lived by one principle: trust no one. Business had taught him that every handshake came with hidden clause, every smile masked greed, and every promise could be broken if the price was high enough. His fortune had been built on this instinct, on his ability to see through the lies of others. Yet here he was, caught off guard, doubting his own judgment of a child no older than 7. Amara shifted in her seat. The faint hum of her soft tune floated through the air, simple and pure. Richard's mind drifted against his will. That melody stirred an old memory. His mother. Long ago, when the world felt safer, his mother would hum softly as she tucked him into bed. Before wealth had replaced love with suspicion. Before betrayal had hardened his heart. For a brief moment, Richard felt something unfamiliar. Warmth. Then the sharp glimmer of his watch caught Amara's eye. She stood and walked over, her small hands reaching out. Richard's heart jumped. Now it comes. This is where innocence fades. But Amara didn't slip it into her pocket. Instead, she polished the watch on the hem of her little dress, removing a faint fingerprint. Then she placed it back on the table, straightened it beside the wallet, and whispered, "Things should always be cared for." Richard nearly opened his eyes at that moment. His instincts screamed for explanation. Who taught her this discipline? Grace, no doubt. Her mother must have raised her with strict values. But still, Richard couldn't let go of the doubt that lingered. Could this all be an act? He had seen adults pretend before. People smiled sweetly while hiding their true intentions. If grown men and women could fake loyalty for money, could a child be taught to do the same? The thought unsettled him even more than her honesty. If Amara was genuine, then Richard had to face something scarier than greed, the possibility that he had been wrong about people all along. Yet, as Amara returned to her stool and folded her hands neatly on her lap, humming that innocent tune, the billionaire's carefully constructed walls cracked a little more. Her every action seemed too effortless, too natural to be rehearsed. And for the first time in many years, Richard found himself in dangerous territory, not of losing money, but of losing the armor around his heart. The grand living room glowed under the chandelier, but to Richard, lying still on the couch, it felt like another world. Every sound, the faint ticking of the clock, the quiet shuffle of Amara's feet, was magnified. He had set out to test the maid's child, expecting greed, but instead found himself listening to a melody of innocence. Amara rose from her seat again. Richard's eyes, barely open behind his feigned slumber, followed her every move. She walked toward the towering bookshelf in the corner, tiptoeing to reach a volume far too heavy for her small arms. With effort, she tugged at it until it slipped into her grasp. The book wobbled dangerously, but she hugged it tightly to her chest and carried it back toward the couch. Placing it gently on the table, she whispered, "If he wakes up, maybe he'll want to read." Richard's lips nearly twitched. That book was one of his mother's old favorites, long forgotten among the rows of leather-bound volumes. How did she choose that one, of all the others? As he pondered, a faint tremor in his hand betrayed him. Decades of sitting at desks in boardrooms had left him with stiff joints. Amara noticed. Her small face grew concerned, and without hesitation she reached into her pocket, pulling out the tiny cloth she always carried. Kneeling beside him, she began gently wiping his hand as though caring for something fragile. "You must be very tired, mister," she murmured softly, her tone full of sincerity. "Mom says people who work hard should rest properly." Richard's chest tightened. He couldn't remember the last time someone had shown him care without expecting something in return. Most who surrounded him, business partners, so-called friends, even relatives, only came close for his wealth. Yet here was a child offering comfort as naturally as breathing. Still, he resisted the urge to reveal himself. He needed more. Was this simple kindness, or something deeper? Then Amara surprised him once more. She knelt on the carpet, clasped her small hands together, and closed her eyes. In a soft whisper, she prayed, "God, please bless this man. He lets Mommy work here so we can eat. Keep him safe and happy." Richard's heart froze. The wallet stuffed with bills, the watch worth more than most people's homes. They hadn't mattered to her at all. Instead, she had chosen to use her quiet moment to pray for him. For a man who had built walls of distrust around himself, it was a blow stronger than any betrayal. He had doubted her, set a trap for her, and yet she had answered with selflessness. And lying there on the couch, Richard Harlow, the billionaire feared in boardrooms, realized he had underestimated the strength of innocence. The mansion's quiet harmony suddenly broke with a soft thud. Richard's wallet, heavy and overstuffed with bills, slipped from the polished coffee table and landed on the floor. The sound echoed like a strike of fate in the silence of the room. Richard's heart leapt. His eyes stayed closed, but his mind sharpened. This is it, the real test. The wallet lay open, several crisp bills peeking out, practically glowing under the chandelier's light. It was temptation served on a silver platter, the kind no adult Richard knew could resist, let alone a child. Amara's head turned instantly at the noise. Her little body slid off the stool, and she approached the wallet carefully. Richard could feel his own pulse hammering in his chest. Every step she took pulled at his nerves. Would she take a bill? Hide it in her pocket? His entire worldview seemed to balance on what she did next. Bending down, Amara picked up the wallet with both hands. She tilted it, her curious eyes flickering at the sight of the money inside. For one agonizing moment, Richard was certain she would reach in, but she didn't. Instead, she carefully tucked the bills back into place, closed the wallet, and walked toward the table. With surprising precision for someone so small, she placed it neatly back in its exact spot, aligning it with the edge of the table. Then she straightened the watch beside it, as if restoring order. "Shall I?" Her soft voice broke the silence. "Mom says, if it's not yours, you should never touch it. Things need to stay where they belong." The billionaire's chest tightened. Those words, so simple, so innocent, hit him harder than any business negotiation or courtroom battle ever had. In his world, people betrayed each other for less than what was in that wallet. Yet here was a child who could have easily taken from him, but chose not to without hesitation. She walked back to her stool, sat down quietly, and folded her hands in her lap. A faint smile crossed her lips as she looked toward the kitchen, proud of the choice she had made, though no one had seen it. Or so she thought. Richard, lying frozen on the couch, felt something foreign stir inside him. Guilt. He had set a trap for an innocent child, assuming she would fail. He had doubted not only Amara, but also Grace, her mother, who had raised her with values that couldn't be bought. The wallet rested safely on the table again, untouched, but Richard no longer cared about the money inside. What mattered was the truth that had just unfolded before his eyes. Amara had passed a test that countless adults in his life would have failed. And for the first time in many years, Richard Harlow felt a lump in his throat, realizing he had misjudged the very people who had shown him the purest form of honesty. The grand chandelier sparkled above the living room, casting golden reflections across the marble floor. Yet to Richard Harlow, the billionaire lying asleep on the couch, the room felt heavier than ever. His test, his calculated experiment, had already played out. Amara had faced temptation, and she had passed with an innocence that stunned him. But Richard stayed still, his chest rising slowly with feigned breaths. Why didn't he reveal himself? He didn't know. Maybe pride chained him down, maybe guilt, or maybe for the first time in years, he wanted to observe longer, to witness truth in its purest form without the influence of his presence. The small shuffle of footsteps drew closer from the hallway. Grace, Amara's mother, entered the room carrying a tray. Her apron bore light traces of flour, her hair tied back neatly, though strands fell loose around her tired face. She balanced the tray carefully, the steam from the teapot curling upward like a faint ribbon. Her eyes immediately found her daughter, sitting upright on the stool, legs swinging gently but quietly, hands folded neatly on her lap. The scene made Grace's lips curve into a soft smile. "You've been so patient, sweetheart," she said gently, setting the tray down on the table. "I hope you weren't too bored while I finished in the kitchen." Amara shook her head eagerly. Her voice was small but clear. "No, Mommy. I was good. I fixed the man's blanket so he wouldn't get cold, and when his wallet fell, I picked it up and put it back. I didn't touch the money. I promise." Richard's chest tightened. The words struck him like a blade, not because of accusation, but because of their raw honesty. She hadn't said it to impress anyone. She simply wanted her mother to know she had done the right thing. Grace's eyes widened just slightly, her hand pausing as she reached for the teapot. Then, slowly, her expression softened into one of deep pride. She bent down, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "My sweet girl," she whispered into Amara's hair. "You don't know how happy you make me. That's exactly what I've always wanted. For you to grow up kind, honest, and strong." Richard's pulse quickened. For years, he had surrounded himself with adults who wore masks, friends who were not friends, partners who only lingered until the profit disappeared, smiles that hid betrayal, deals that traded trust for greed. And yet, here, inside his own mansion, sitting on a plain wooden stool, was a maid's daughter, showing him a kind of integrity he hadn't seen in decades. His gaze shifted to Grace. She didn't know she was being watched. She didn't know this entire evening had been orchestrated by Richard himself. To her, this was just another quiet moment of motherhood. There was no attempt to perform, no hidden agenda, no calculation in her warmth. Only pride, only love. Richard felt something foreign swell inside him, a heaviness in his chest, a tightness in his throat. He realized that for all his billions, all his power, all his prestige, he had overlooked the simple wealth standing right in front of him. Values, morals, integrity. Still, he didn't move. Revealing himself felt impossible. His pride battled his guilt, dragging him deeper into silence. He wasn't ready to admit what he had done, that he had doubted them, tested them, treated them as if their worth had to be proven. Grace poured tea into 2 cups and handed one gently to her daughter, careful to cool it with a spoon first. Amara sipped and giggled softly, her eyes bright, unaware that a billionaire just a few feet away was silently watching her like a man confronted with his own reflection. As they spoke in soft tones, Richard kept still. Every word, every action from them etched deeper into him than any corporate speech or political deal ever had. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the charade, but he knew one thing for certain. He would never be able to look at Grace or Amara the same way again. The mansion was quiet, yet Richard Harlow's heart beat so loud he could almost hear it echo. He sat frozen on the couch, pretending to stir awake. But in truth, he had heard every word exchanged between Grace and her daughter. Amara's soft little voice, trembling with innocence. "I didn't touch the money, Mommy. I promise," had pierced him deeper than any betrayal ever had. For decades, Richard had trusted only contracts and figures, not people. But now, in his own living room, he had witnessed an honesty he thought no longer existed. He finally shifted beneath the blanket. Grace looked up, startled, while Amara's eyes went wide. Richard rubbed his eyes slowly, as if waking from a nap. "Good evening," he said quietly, his voice heavier than usual. Grace straightened, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. "Oh, sir, we didn't mean to disturb you. We thought you were asleep." Richard's gaze lingered on Amara. Her innocent curiosity unsettled him more than the most ruthless business rival ever had. He drew a deep breath. "I wasn't asleep," he admitted. "I was testing something." Grace frowned. "Testing?" He leaned forward, clasping his hands. His words were reluctant but honest. "When my wallet fell, I pretended not to notice. I wanted to see what your daughter would do, if she would give in to temptation." The room stilled. Grace's face tightened. She stood taller, her voice calm yet cutting. "You tested my child." Richard nodded, shame tightening his chest. "Yes, and she proved me wrong, more than I expected." Grace shook her head slowly. "With respect, sir, my daughter is not your experiment. She's a child. She doesn't need to prove her worth or her honesty to anyone. I've raised her to know right from wrong, whether or not someone is watching." The billionaire lowered his gaze. Never in his life had a maid spoken to him with such quiet strength. "You're right," he said finally. "I was wrong to doubt. I've seen more truth tonight in your little girl than I've seen in all my business partners combined." He turned toward Amara, softening his tone. "Do you know what you did tonight?" The child tilted her head. "No. You reminded me of something I lost a long time ago," Richard said. "When I was your age, I believed in honesty too, but as I grew older, people betrayed me. They lied, cheated, used me. I stopped believing in goodness. Until now." Amara blinked, her words pure and unshaken. "But Mommy says money isn't everything. She says kindness and truth matter most, because lies only hurt people." Her innocence disarmed him completely. He looked back at Grace. "You've raised her well, better than I ever imagined. And I owe you both an apology." Grace's expression softened, though her voice stayed firm. "I don't need an apology, Mr. Harlow. What I want is for you to remember, trust isn't built on tricks. It's built on respect." Richard slowly stood. His presence no longer filled the room with cold authority. It carried humility. He walked to the table, placed his wallet in front of Amara, and said, "This wallet holds more money than many people see in years, but its value is nothing compared to the lesson you taught me. You didn't touch it because you knew it wasn't yours. That is worth more than all the bills inside." Amara tilted her head. "But why would I take what doesn't belong to me?" she asked simply. The innocence of her question broke something in him. Richard closed his eyes briefly, fighting the sting in them. Then he looked at Grace once more. "You're right," he repeated, his voice unsteady. "I won't forget this. Not tonight. Not ever." Grace gave a small nod, guiding her daughter gently toward the dining room. Before leaving, Amara turned back, her voice soft but sure. "Good night, Mr." Richard's lips curved faintly. "Good night, Amara." As they disappeared down the hall, Richard remained in the living room, staring at the wallet still resting on the table. For so many years, he had measured everything by wealth. But tonight, he realized the truth. The contents of that wallet meant nothing compared to what had been shown to him. Grace's dignity, Amara's honesty, their quiet, unwavering values. He sat back on the couch, closing his eyes, not to pretend this time, but to reflect. For the first time in decades, he felt hope. Hope that trust could still exist. Hope that innocence could still survive in a world obsessed with gain. And in that humbling silence, Richard finally understood. He had not been testing Grace and her daughter. They had been testing him, and he had barely passed.